everybody, and welcome to the next episode of NatChat. Today we are joined by John Wood and Alex Hinchcliffe from Palo Alto Networks, and we're going to be talking all around the latest security vulnerabilities with them. So, hi guys, welcome to NatChat.
Hi there, pleasure to be
here. Hi guys.
Brilliant. And for our audience today, it might be best just actually to start off with a couple of intros. So, Alex, do you want to tell all of our listeners who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Alex Hinchcliffe. I'm a threat intelligence analyst with Unit 42, which is the threat research team within Palo Alto Networks. We've been here since the start of Palo Alto Networks, really. We weren't acquired in or anything. We were built from the ground up. And then we started with the threat intelligence side. I think we had at one point, about 18 or 20 odd members doing the threat intel work from all around the world. And this year, or I should say last year, we acquired a company called Crypsys that does incident response. They're now Unit 42 Consulting. And so the two teams combined form Unit 42 today. So that's the intelligence side on one part, and the consultants and the incident response on the other. And as you can imagine, that feeds a really nice ecosystem of data because we have the threat intelligence that we produce empowering the incident responders as they work with clients who have been breached. And as we have those people working with breached clients, they're feeding us data right from the front lines, if you like, about how victims have been breached, with what tools, what the threat actors are doing, what their motivations are, and all that kind of stuff. And that feeds into our intel and enriches it further. Beyond that, we have lots of products and customers that feed us telemetry. So we use a lot of that telemetry to understand the trends of what's happening. So how big a particular threat is within our customer base. And finally, we do lots of partnerships with law enforcement organizations, with national cyber security centers, various other governments and public sector organizations to try, if possible, to get positive outcomes from these cyber attacks. So making arrests, disrupting networks, and bringing down the bad actors, really.
That's really interesting. And it's amazing that you guys obviously work so closely with almost like that next step, seeing that real impact of where that threat intelligence has come from, and like we say, putting the bad guys behind bars.
Yeah.
Thank you. And John, introduce us to yourself.
Yeah. Hi everyone. So my name's John Wood. I work for the systems engineering team at Palo Alto Networks. So I'm working more on our technologies and product side, working with our major partners and customers to make sure that everyone is able to use our technologies as effectively as possible.
Brilliant, thank you. And obviously, we're recording this podcast in January 2022, and we saw and we're still seeing a little bit of an impact from a recent vulnerability that was put out there, the Log4j. And obviously, you guys would have had a lot of exposure and experience to this. It'd be great to get your take and insight on it. I don't know, John, if you might be able to put a bit of context into, we call it a vulnerability, but what technically made this more vicious than some of the other threats we've seen?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Log4j or Log4j is the name of the kind of affected software. Log4Shell is the name of the vulnerability that exploited that software. And to give some background, Log4j is an open source logging library provided by Apache Software Foundation. Now, many of your listeners will know that Apache Software Foundation provides Apache, the world's most popular open source web server. And Log4j is a component of this and is very commonly implemented by other apps and services. So its function is to record events such as errors and output log messages for them for administrators to review. Now, it's not a technology that people would use in isolation. You wouldn't necessarily take this off the shelf unless you're a developer, but it's commonly used as a component within other technologies. So logging is a standard part of almost all software, and Log4j is very widespread. Now, because it's not discrete software, although there's already a patch that's been made available, it's not so simple to assume that all vulnerable software would have incorporated that patch. So it's almost certain that a lot of systems out there will still remain vulnerable at this point in time. So the Log4Shell is a remote code execution vulnerability, and it can potentially allow attackers to break into systems, steal passwords and sensitive data, and deploy malware. So it works because instructions like shellcode, for example, can be inserted into transactions, and they are then passed and executed by Log4j. So not only is the vulnerability very secure, but what makes things worse is that this attack needs very little expertise to exploit. It's already been seen in the wild. It's proliferating hugely. For example, in one day in December, we identified over 10 million hits against our threat signatures. So it's a perfect storm. NCSC, the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, says that this is potentially the most severe computer vulnerability in years. Log4j has been given a CVSS severity score of 10, which is the highest possible. So corporate systems are naturally impacted really significantly, but other software is also affected. Minecraft, for example, the block building game, hugely popular amongst kids and adults, that was affected. Steam, a popular gaming platform on PCs, were shown to be vulnerable as well. So our advice for anyone who administrates a system, identify where Log4j is being used within your organization. That might mean working with suppliers if necessary. Check to make sure that software is patched. And that for any software that can't be patched, it's important to consider mitigations where appropriate as well.
I think it's really interesting, like you say, it kind of has a universal attack surface. It shows no bias, does it? It's that one of those core building blocks of all systems. And I'm sure, Alex, within your role, you saw it absolutely spread like wildfire.
Yes, I mean that's the problem these days. I think with software vulnerabilities, that until they're patched or mitigated, they can just be taken over by anyone really, and especially if they're network facing or internet facing, especially to go one step further. Because it allows anyone, any threat actor, whether it's cybercrime or nation state, to effectively sit in the comfort of their own home, their own sofa, scan the internet, looking for vulnerable systems and victims, and exploit them. It's so much easier than the traditional kind of create a phishing email, work on the social engineering technique, hope you get to the right victim in the first place, hope that victim opens the email and clicks on the link that you've produced, and all this stuff. It's just so much easier for the attackers to leverage a software vulnerability, especially when it's network based. So yeah, to echo what John said, it kind of kicked off around Christmas time. All these things do. It's either a Friday or Christmas or a holiday that these things happen.
It's the December surprise.
I don't know how this is still the case, but they know how to hurt us basically as network defenders. So yeah, kind of kicking off. I think it was actually discovered and reported to Apache late November, and then kind of over the course of early to mid-December, various things happened, such as there was the RCE that was discovered. NIST published the CVE report about it being critical. And then Apache, from mid-December through to early December through to mid-December, were updating their software and pushing out patches. I think what made this one slightly more cumbersome and confusing to deal with was that Apache had to release multiple updates. So at first they made a patch update, then second they removed this logging feature completely. Then there was a denial of service attack found within the fix that they'd done. And although it wasn't as critical or severe for the victim to be exploited with that, it still was problematic. So I think in the end there were 4, maybe 5 versions of Apache and Log4j updates that were made. And so for a system administrator, the nightmare is, do we have this software in our network? How do we find it? How do we patch it? And then as soon as they've done that, they have to then figure out, go through that again and patch it again. So it definitely wasn't the simplest of fixes to deal with. And in terms of the attackers that we saw using it, I think most were opportunistic, cybercrime actors. So people scanning it to drop and install bots for botnets, crypto miners to try and mine cryptocurrency and make some money for the actors. There were reports of nation state adversaries taking advantage of it as well. But I think what's clear is, and our prediction is that this will be here for years to come, because some of the mainstream software has been identified that uses Log4j, like all the Apache stuff. And I think we listed on one of our blogs that there was Apache Struts, Flink, Elasticsearch, Apache Dubo, Logstash, just a whole bunch of applications that were vulnerable. And I think also the easiest target was for HTTP scanning. So any of those applications listening on port 80 that were easily scannable, easily identifiable, and thus easily exploitable were the low-hanging fruit targets. But actually, if you've got some weird bespoke application running on the network that happens to have implemented Log4j, it's really only a matter of time for threat actors to discover that and work out ways to get to that we'll probably see another round of exploitation happening as well. So I think this one's going to be with us for a while. I think the one positive thing, sorry to interrupt, I think the one positive thing was that there was a really big collective response from the industry on this, especially considering the time of year. I think, all the NCSCs, as John pointed out, all the certs, all the CISAs of the world, those organizations published information about this. And there was a kind of call to action collectively around the world to try and patch as many systems as possible and do other stuff. So I think, although the numbers we saw were high, like 10 million on a day, and that's just for our customers running our threat prevention software, I think the potential for it to have been much worse was also there. So that's a positive, at least.
I completely agree, and it's so interesting hearing you talk about actually the evolution and the fact that we're not out of the woods yet, and there is still that possibility of it to kind of go into the next phase. But seeing that camaraderie between the cyber professionals of the world to kind of band together and share knowledge and insight is fantastic. You mentioned so many different styles of threat as well, and we can't necessarily pinpoint or predict exactly what is going to be the next one. No one has a crystal ball, but is there anything where you're seeing actually a popularity in a style of trend emerge? Is there something which, are we going to see that the most damaging threats moving forward will take a similar build to like Log4j and the Logshell attack?
Yeah, I think so. So we've got a few issues at the moment that I guess we're dealing with that you could call issues. One is ransomware. And every time I mention this and talk to customers about it or talk to the world about it on podcasts or conference talks, I always feel a bit strange because we've been talking about ransomware for years and it's just evolved over time, but it has been with us for so long. And it's almost at the point where you're literally beating the dead horse to talk about it again. And the main evolutions are that the attacks now seem to be more targeted, or at least targeted against businesses, in the hope that if they hold an entire business to ransom, they can ask for more money. And the likelihood is that if they've impacted the business operations, the victim is more likely to pay just because they need to get back up and running to serve their customers and clients. So that's definitely a shift. Another is that we've seen a lot more double extortion technique being used by ransomware actors. So they, before they encrypt the data, they steal it, and then they threaten to publish it on a blame and shame website or leak website on the dark web. And that again adds more leverage and pressure on the victim organization to pay up, so their data and their blueprints, their patents, their PII, whatever it might be, is not exposed to anyone on the internet or the dark web. What has also fueled this kind of rise of ransomware are two things. One is the use of software vulnerabilities, just like we talked about with Log4Shell. So there are ransomware actors that almost exclusively leverage software vulnerabilities in order to breach the network and then get in and deploy their ransomware. So that's one. And the second is the ransomware as a service model, which is where you have a bunch of operators who are the people who develop the ransomware software. They're the people that maintain the infrastructure for the leak website. They may also deal with the funding and maybe even the money laundering of cryptocurrency and all those other services. And effectively, you could have anyone come along, even with the most basic ICT skills, as long as they've got some money. They can pay to be an affiliate, they can get the ransomware, they can get access to a network somehow, either through themselves or through another service, and then they can deploy the ransomware and make a lot of money. So that ransomware as a service model has definitely helped to fuel that ecosystem.
Yes, and it does sound like something a little bit out of a horror story, doesn't it, sometimes? Um, but it's not, like we said before, it's not all doom and gloom. There are good guys out there. There are solutions out there which are built to kind of help protect. And John, I don't know for our listeners, if there was like one thing or a couple of things to take away from what we discussed today on some tips or first mover steps to really protect yourself or increase your security posture against some of these types of threats, what would you recommend?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think if I was to highlight one thing, one takeaway to just go and do, there's actually something that's really important and really easy and cost effective, a way that you can increase security posture, make sure that your current cybersecurity technology is correctly patched and configured against vendor best practice recommendations. So Gartner did some research which suggested that 99% of breaches occur because of firewall misconfiguration. I mean, that's an absolutely incredible figure, and it shows that there's a huge number of missed opportunities out there where an organisation has had the tools in place to block an attack, but was unable to regardless. And the fact of the matter is, firewall configuration isn't static. Changes to rules are requested all the time in most business environments. And if a rigorous policy change control process isn't followed, that leads to the device becoming more open and less secure over time. So it's important to regularly review configuration, treat best practice configurations as a compliance requirement. Many firewall vendors offer tools to help. Palo Alto Networks has a process called a best practice assessment. And basically, we recommend that it's performed on a 6-month cycle. The TILIC are able to offer this service to their customers for free. And basically, what it will involve is taking a look at the configuration, the policy of a firewall, tracking it over time so that we can actually properly profile how that firewall kind of drifts from its kind of best practice state, and then offer recommendations in terms of how to configure that firewall more effectively. And that could mean things like implementing a proper application-based policy to avoid holes being present in through which attacks can fester. It means potentially switching on SSL decryption, configuring various features to really map against what we think the kind of best stance of that device and to provide the best likelihood that network security infrastructure is going to protect the organization when the time comes for it to be used. So it really makes sense to make sure that your firewall's properly configured, able to perform as expected, and we're here and we're able to help you get to that place.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting and important as well. You said that doing it on like a 6-monthly cadence review, and it's not just that annual review you sometimes get. It is something which needs to be looked at more regularly and checked in with, really.
Yeah, it's often the kind of thought that once a firewall is there and configured and a policy's put on it, then that's it. It's kind of a fire and forget type approach. But the reality is that, as I said, these things aren't static. They do change over time. Configuration that may be configured when the box is deployed may be perfectly legitimate. There may be software updates that need to be applied, better versions of software, new features perhaps might be there that will help to provide additional functionalities, as well as that kind of slip of configuration that can lead to that box potentially becoming less secure.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to both of you for joining us today. It's been really interesting and really insightful to hear from your side, and Alex, especially from the Unit 42 side, of just what makes up the vulnerabilities and what people should be thinking about for 2022. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.